Hello, it's really exciting to be here and to be part of the first Days of Happiness in Bulgaria. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Action for Happiness, which is a global movement for social change, which we hope you'll be part of. And seeing you sitting there reminds me a little bit about how my own journey in all of this started, which was sitting at a conference several years ago, and I heard people talk about positive psychology, and I just knew there and then that was part of my future. I'd worked in organisational behaviour for many years, and in that aspect of psychology, but I knew that this was where I needed to be, and that led me to go and study in the States with Martin Seligman and various people, and then since then have been trying to apply what I learned and help other people apply it in their lives in lots of different contexts. And that's what brought me to Action for Happiness. So what is Action for Happiness all about? What are the questions we're seeking to answer? Well, the story starts with Richard Layard, who's a leading economist. He's a professor at the London School of Economics and has been very influential. And in 2005, he wrote a book called Happiness, Lessons from a New Science. And this was quite radical. So here's an economist, somebody who's focused on money and numbers, arguing the case that we need to be taking people's feelings into account, the way we measure and look at our society, the way we develop policy. So this is really radical stuff. And people started to write to him. They started to say, we want to be part of this. We want to help make this happen. And thousands of people. And so he was thinking, well, what can I do? And talking with a bunch of friends and people he knew, they decided to start the movement, to found Action for Happiness. So along with Jeff Mulgan, who's a social innovator in the UK, Anthony Selden, who's a leading person in education, they formed Action for Happiness, and various other of us came on board to help get it going. And so part of what we're looking at is, measuring, how do we measure and value and think about our progress as society. That's one thing Action for Happiness is there to kind of help people think about. It's also to think about actually what makes us happy. I think if I asked most of you in the room, what do you ultimately want in your life? Most of you would say, ultimately, I want to be happy. And if I asked you, what do you want for your kids? You probably say, ultimately, I really want them to be happy. Yet do we know what that means? We say that and we feel that, but actually how many of us actually think about what that means and what we can do? So Action for Happiness, really part of our role is about unpacking happiness, helping people think about what actually goes into a happy life. And then what can we do? Knowing is not enough. We have to take action, as Leo was very, conveyed very strongly this morning. This is about action. So if we know what makes us happy, we know all the different ingredients, what can we actually do to make a difference? So these are things that Action for Happiness is here to help with. So this is where it starts. This is from data that Richard includes in his book. It's incredible if we look back over the last 50 or 60 years. On average, this is average, we are probably at least 2 to 3 times richer than we've been ever before in history. Think back to your grandparents and their parents and their grandparents' lives. Your lives is probably immeasurably better. You've got inside toilets, you may have heating if you need it. You've got some sort of education system, and a healthcare system may not be as good as you like, but you've got a healthcare system. But yet, when we look at how happy people are, that has not increased. And actually, in some cases, it's gone down. We know mental ill health is increasing. We know that it's happening at an earlier and earlier age. So what's going wrong? Clearly a pure focus on money is not right. And there's things that we knew back back here that somehow we've lost. And I think back to my mother's childhood. When I was growing up, I heard my mother and her sister often refer back to their childhood and early adulthood. It was a really good time, and I got messages about the connections they had and how much fun they had and the people they knew and playing in the streets and all that sort of stuff. And I had a very overwhelming sense that there was a happiness to that. I had no sense that there was anything that wasn't happy. Yet the facts of my mother's childhood were very different. She was one of 11 children, only 7 of which survived childhood. At the age of 5, she was a London child, our family from London. War broke out. Poor London children were put on trains to go and live with complete strangers in parts of the country they'd never even heard of, let alone visited before. And they stayed there for 6 years. And when my mother came back and her sisters came back, there was no house. It had been flattened. They ended up living in a small, not that their previous house was big, a tiny house with 2 very large families living there. So those are the facts, but actually their experience, despite all of that, was a really happy one. So there's some things that they knew then, and some things that they lived, about the way they lived their lives, which we've somehow lost. And I love this quote, which is from Professor Tim Jackson. I'll read it. "We are being persuaded to spend money that we don't have on things that we don't need, to create impressions that won't last, on people we don't care about." So over the last 50 years, we've become richer. Our spending power has become greater. We've got more stuff. We've got designer brands or whatever. But it has not made us happy. We've lost focus on some of the things that matter. And we're focused on quick fixes. We want short-term hits. We want looking for pleasure all the time. But we know from the science, we know that doesn't last, that's a sort of never-ending treadmill. I love this stuff. You can actually buy these. I'd leave you to guess which country they're from. So action for happiness. The idea of action for happiness is quite simple. It's about trying to actually refocus what we do. And it's about people doing stuff together. And it's thinking about what action we can take together. So we were launched in April 2011, and the response has been overwhelming. We've got over 21,000 members. These are people who've signed up in 123 countries. I think we've got about 40 signed up members in Bulgaria. We're hoping after today there'll be a few more. And the people that use our websites and our resources is much greater than that. We've got a little bit of work to do over here. And we have 3 underlying beliefs, really. This is at the core of what we do, of what we're about, is that we can make a difference. We can do things that affect our own happiness and impact the happiness of other people. At the heart is the belief that, and Leo said this very beautifully, other people, that helping others is essential for a happier society. This has to be part of it. It's almost like I describe it as a social glue that connects us together. And if we understand what enables happiness, we can actually prioritize some of those things, whether as individuals, as families, schools, or indeed as governments. And we ask our members to take a simple pledge. It's very simple. I'll try to create more happiness and less unhappiness in the world around me. It's very simple. There's no obligation. It doesn't cost any money to do it. But actually it's quite profound if you think about what does that mean for how I am as a parent, how I am as a work colleague, how I am as a neighbour. It actually makes you think maybe slightly differently. So that's what we ask our members to do. And what we're hoping to happen, what we're hoping to happen, of course, is that over time we'll start to see a shift in this line. And we know that the economic outlook is very uncertain, but regardless of that, can we together shift this line upwards? And we know that we need to take action not just on one level, but on multiple levels. So what Action for Happiness is focusing really what I describe as top-down, so focusing on governments and measurement and policy, bottom-up, individuals like you and me and what we can do in the world around us, and middle-out, so the organisations and institutions, what can they do? Be it a school, be it a community group, be it a workplace, what can we do? What are the implications of all this stuff around, for on all of those different levels? And we have to do this on a multi-pronged front. So at a governmental level in the UK, there's quite a lot happening. This is our Prime Minister, David Cameron, before he was elected. And he said, and again, I'll read this because I think it's quite important. This is what he said before he came to government. It's time we admitted there's more to life than money. And it's time we focus not just on GDP, but GWB, general well-being. Well-being can't be measured by money or traded in markets. It's about the quality of our culture, the beauty of our surroundings, and above all, the strength of our relationships. And he's kept to his word. You know, since being elected, he has implemented, we're the second country in the world to actually measure well-being distinctly and take seriously people's feelings about their lives. His other policies may not be making people very happy, but at least we're starting to get some baseline measure so we can track progress. And these are some of the subjective questions, the feeling questions that we're now surveying 200,000 people in the UK. So how satisfied you are with your life, how happy or anxious you are, and to what extent do you think the things you do in your life are worthwhile. There are objective measures as well, and of course this is on top of all the standard metrics and things that we look at. It's not perfect, but it's a start. And what that means is we start to get information about what's making a difference and where things are different. So if we see this is from an early subset of the data. The first year's worth of data it will be coming out late this summer. But this is some early data that was from earlier in the year. And this is simple. So we can see that single people are happier than divorced people. Married people are happier than people who are living together. We can see that unemployment, the longer you're unemployed, the less happy you are. And you may be sitting there thinking, well, hang on, I could have probably guessed that. That doesn't really, tell us much. But actually, it does. When you start to get the ability to cut this data by age, by area of the country, by gender, by ethnicity, it starts to give you very rich patterns of data so you can think about what are the policies you're making and where do you need to affect change and why are some things different in one part of the country to the other and what are some of the factors that are causing that. So that's what's happening in the UK, which is great. But there's stuff happening more broadly. I was lucky enough to be part of a meeting at the United Nations in April, which was 600 people from countries around the world got together, economists, psychologists, people focused on sustainability got together and were talking about how do we actually take this stuff seriously. It was in preparation for the G20 in Rio. And this is the Prime Minister of Bhutan, who's actually, they've been leading the world in this. It's a great example of how a small country can actually lead really quite dramatic change and influence. This is the president of Costa Rica, who's on the Happy Planet Index, is the happiest country. And this is a letter from the Prime Minister, and we were very pleased that they mentioned Action for Happiness as a great example. So governments are important because what they do influences policies, which affects everybody's lives. But they can't make us happy, short of having smile inspectors, and we don't really want that. What can we and organisations do? So we're trying to help people change and take action on those fronts too. This is a kind of backbone. Many of you will have picked up a flyer out there. We had some of these to hand out. So this is what we call at Action for Happiness our 10 keys to happier living. It sounds light, it sounds trite, but actually it's based on science. So what we've done is we've drilled down a lot of the research, the sort of main themes from the research in psychology, neuroscience, etc., into what are the things that people can do that they have control over, that to some degree, that they can make a difference for their own and other happiness. And it's a simple framework, but we're finding it, people are resonating with people and they're applying it in different parts of their lives. And Leo talked about dreaming, and this spells, the acronym for our 10 keys is Great Dream. I'm not quite sure what the translation of that is in Bulgarian, but hopefully something similar. And we talk about the first 5 keys here as being things broadly, things that you can do in the outside world that influence how you feel on the inside. and 5 things that are more internal kind of actions and skills, more reflective action skills that impact how you are how happy you are in the outside world. So, and we're finding these are embedded in school curricula, school textbooks, in offices, in hospitals. We're quite excited by the spread of these. And our website is very rich. Each one of those keys is backed up by lots of references and information about each of them and actions pertaining to each of them. It's all on our website. And there's posters, some of which you can see around the room, for each of the keys, which people kind of fun, and they get some of the messages across. We should maybe try and do some translations of those. But then, one of the criticisms we've had is, well, oh, this stuff's well and good. If you're kind of rich and middle class, you've got enough, then you can worry about this stuff. This isn't really stuff that is going to make a difference to people who don't have that much financially. But actually, we argue that's not the case. We argue that this stuff, you may deliver it in different ways, you may have to, approach people in different ways to make it accessible. But actually, this is stuff for everyone, rich and poor. And this is an example of some work that was done with some of our partners in London. It was a project that was done teaching sort of happiness skills or positive psychology skills, if you like, to women on a council housing estate in South London, a really, really poor area, very high crime rate, lots of single parents, etc. And it was teaching women these skills. And this was the sort of quote that we had back from people, is my circumstances haven't changed. I'm still living on the same Peckham housing estate, but my ability to deal with them has. And this doesn't mean just accepting them. It means thinking about, what I can control, what I can take action over to make a difference. And these 2 women were part of that group. It was hard work to get people to attend because people weren't used to coming to courses like that. They felt it wasn't for them. But once they came along, the majority of women stayed for the whole of the 6 weeks. And these 2 have since gone on, and they're now teaching that to other women in their communities and spreading this stuff around, which is fantastic. It's changed their lives, which is brilliant. So it's not just a skill for the rich and the comfortable. These are skills for everybody. And schools, really, we all know education's really important. But what's happening certainly the UK and the US and other countries, as far as we can see, is that our schools are increasingly turning into exam factories. It's all focused on attainment and focused on getting qualifications for jobs, that things like the softer skills, life skills, are taking a back seat. But it's really important that this stuff is taught to kids earlier, and it can be. There's some fantastic examples, and I know we'll be hearing from some of them from Randy later on, that kids can actually learn these skills, and it makes a difference. And it actually makes a difference to their academic attainment as well. So we're working with partnering with organisations that are making a difference. We're working with schools to encourage them to actually embed some of this work and this thinking, not just in a isolated class, but throughout the curriculum and throughout the school values, and infecting teachers as well as the kids. So that the teachers have got to experience some of that culture too. And talking about sort of teachers and the school being their workplace. In workplaces, we know, probably the majority of us spend about 50% of our waking hours doing some form of work. Yet workplaces are actually not that happy. There's research in the UK, for example, that suggests that 50% of the workforce, at least 50% of the workforce, are not happy and they're not engaged. And this is not great, because we know there's evidence to suggest that happier workers are more productive, they're more creative, they come up with better ideas, they have better relationships with each other. So happiness is good for work. It's good for work. And if people are unhappy at work, then that spreads out to at home. You don't leave that at the door of the office. You take it home. So if people are unhappy in the workplace, that's spreading out. So is there a corporate social responsibility really on employers to actually think about this stuff? And these are not costly changes. I mean, I've worked in organisations all my life, you know, and we're not talking about very costly programmes or paying people bigger bonuses. It's actually small changes. I like the phrase, smallest things that make the biggest difference, which I think is great. We're working with a big telecoms company at the moment, teaching managers some of the science so that they can then apply that with their teams, because, you know, they're the people that have a real big influence on the majority of people's day-to-day experience at work. The leaders are important, but actually managers are the ones that people have a lot of contact with. So if we can shift the way they are, the way they interrelate with their teams, we can make a difference. And in our communities, I mean, this is really at the heart of Action for Happiness, and this is where hopefully a lot of you are as well, is that how can we get people to take action where they are with their, you know, with their local communities and with their neighbours. We had a lovely story when we were starting up. A woman wrote to us and said, I was on my way to work, I was cycling. And I needed to be on time because I had a meeting. I was cycling along, busy traffic, etc., and I got a puncture. And I was standing by the side of the road thinking, what am I going to do? Because I've got to get to my meeting. I can't take my bike on the bus. I can't ride my bike. And if I take my bike home, I'm going to be late. And so clearly she was looking very unhappy when all of a sudden another cyclist came up and stopped by her and said, can I help? And she said, yeah, well, I've got a puncture. He said, well, I've got a puncture repair kit. So he helped her mend her tyre. And she was, you know, got ready and she could get back on her bike and head on her journey. But just before she did that, she said to me, I'm just curious. It's kind of not typical in the rush hour for people to stop and look out for other people. What made you stop? And this guy said, well, he said, I've just joined this new organisation called Action for Happiness, and it's about spreading happiness. And he said, I just noticed you looking unhappy, and I thought, oh, I can do something to help someone else right now. And so she just wrote, you know, it's working. You know, and we're finding people, these are actual groups that have started around the country, and we've got some toolkits and stuff on the resources, and we're hoping to work with the British Psychological Society to develop more. To actually help people take action. So people are forming groups that are thinking about what happiness means in their local area, book groups, street parties, volunteer groups, gardening groups, lots of things happening. And for me, I mean, I thought I'd better take my own medicine. I'm espousing this stuff. So earlier this month, I helped organise a street party in my street. I live, again, it's London, typical London street. I know my neighbours, I'm sort of friendly and smile, the ones immediately around me, but there's 89 houses on my street, and I probably know people that live in 8 of those houses. So a few of us got together and started to organise this. Within 6 weeks, we had 150 people turn up, and they stayed all day despite pouring rain, because we've had a dreadful summer. And it's really, it's amazed me, it's really changed the street, just one party. You know, people now stop and smile. It takes me half an hour now to walk down my street. It's the only downside, if you're in a hurry. But people smile, they stop and chat and things. And a week after the street party, we noticed there was something wrong with one of our neighbours' houses. She was away. Turns out that this is a woman who lives on her own. She lived in the street for 30 years. I'd never even knew she existed. She's busy, she travels a lot and stuff. And it turned out that she's actually was actually having quite a difficult personal crisis, quite serious one. But had we not had that street party, we wouldn't have known that there was a problem with her house, that we could find a way of getting in touch with her, notify her, and help her out, help her get some things sorted. And she said, you know, if it wasn't for that street party, I'd have felt a lot more alone. I feel a lot more cared for now, and this has really helped me. I just thought, I mean, I feel quite emotional saying about it, because, you know, it's, this stuff makes a difference. So, we'd love you. We'd love that to spread. We'd love you to be that change that by being here, you quite clearly want to see. So, please join us, please sign up, please think about what you can do for your own lives, in your own workplaces, and the schools that you have contact with, and in your communities, because together we can make a difference. Thank you.